everybody, and welcome back to another edition of P&R Communications Tech Tips. My name is Don Humphrey, and today we're going to talk about a service that we provide here at P&R Communications, and that service is heat mapping. And we're going to get into exactly what heat mapping is, why you need it, and how best to use it once you have it. So a heat map is simply a visual representation of complicated or voluminous data that is easily digestible. And why you might need a heat map is, let's say that your local police or fire department, fire inspector, building inspector has come in and said, hey, we have a problem because in your building our police and fire radios aren't working. And in that case, you're going to have somebody come out, evaluate the building, measure the signal level for whatever radio system that the police and fire happen to be using, and then propose a solution to mitigate the shortcomings of that signal in your building. So before we get too deep, let's look at a couple of definitions here, just so we're all starting from the same page. So if we look here, let's talk first about the NFPA. Now, the NFPA, or the National Fire Protection Association, they are a nonprofit global organization that is dedicated to reducing accidents, injuries, and death through electrical and mechanical and communication issues, basically. So the NFPA, they create recommendations and standards and practices that are oftentimes adopted by national, state, and local authorities when they're coming up with their fire code or their building code. So that's all the NFPA is. The 1221 that I put after there, that is the particular document that the NFPA, the particular standard that they've produced that dictates having some type of signal mitigation within your facility, and it dictates how BDAs or bidirectional amplifiers need to operate. Now, the NFPA, again, like I said, they do not write the law. They make recommendations and they produce standards that get adopted by AHJs, and an AHJ is simply an authority having jurisdiction. That could be your state fire marshal, that could be your local fire marshal, that could be your local building inspector, your county building inspector. It really depends on where you live and what community you're in, whether this standard is in place and has to be followed to the letter of the standard that NFPA has produced. Now, the standard that the NFPA has come up with is that the signal level within your facility has to be at least negative 95 dBm for public safety radio systems, and that negative 95 has to cover 90% per floor of your facility. And if they can't speak through their radio system with that negative 95 signal throughout your building, if your signal is below that, then you would need to install, again, depending on your AHJ, a BDA or a bidirectional amplifier. Bidirectional amplifier is simply a two-way pipe, essentially, that it makes radio signals inside easier to get outside, and radio signals outside easier to get inside to the personnel that need it. Colloquially, oftentimes, you've probably heard this referred to as a signal booster, because it's not just a public safety radio product. They also make them for cell phones. Wi-Fi could have a signal booster. So there's a lot of different things that a signal booster or a bidirectional amplifier can do. When you purchase one, you're purchasing it for a certain purpose. And primarily what I'm going to be talking about is producing a heat map to recommend a BDA for public safety radio communications. You've been alerted by your local authority that, hey, your building needs to be in compliance with NFPA 1221. And you're going to need to have a signal study done, and that's where I come in, or that's where we come in. We have multiple teams who are trained in producing heat maps after recording the signal levels throughout your facility. And a lot of times we get made fun of a little bit as we're walking around your facility because we do look like we're kind of out of the Ghostbusters. A lot of times we will have a backpack on, that's got some test equipment in. There'll be an antenna sticking out of the top. We're wearing that on our back. At the same time, we've got a tablet that has all of your floor plans already preloaded into some software. And we also have a pedometer that helps us track our location within your facility. So we're walking around staring down at a tablet, almost looking like we're trying to catch Pokemon throughout your building. But really, we're just making sure we're not getting lost and making sure that we walk everywhere we need to walk to measure that signal level. Now, this particular one, this was after the AHJ is identified that we need to look at your building and you need to get it evaluated. This was the initial evaluation of this particular building. Now, to point out a couple things on this, we talked about that negative 95 dBm level, and that is the dividing line between orange and yellow here. So if we go yellow or further up this legend, so further we get, we turn greener. That is good signal level, and that means that we are meeting or exceeding the standard. Below this line, so orange, red, and this maroon color, or dark red, whatever you want to call it, that means we are below the standard. And in areas that have the orange, red, or maroon, that is going to be a location that requires some signal mitigation with the BDA. So if we zoom in and pull this over a little bit, so we can see that this was beforehand, and the majority of this building has failed the test. So remember, we're looking for a 90% coverage of negative 95 or better. So we would need to have 90% of this floor yellow or green, and we can very clearly see that we have a little bit of yellow and more towards the edges of the building where signal is, before the signal lessens as it's going through the walls, getting into the building. And if you notice here in the core is where we get our darkest reds, and we can see that the overall shade in the middle of that is red. So after we take this initial readings throughout the building, we've produced this heat map. We then installed a BDA, and I'm not going to go into all the details about a BDA. We'll talk about them a little bit, but that's kind of beyond the scope of today's video. We may circle back and talk a little bit more about the specifics of the BDA later on. But suffice it to say, then we installed a BDA, and we installed it with 8 antennas. This was a 2-story building. We installed 4 antennas on the first floor, kind of over towards the corners in those areas there where you can see my cursor bouncing around there. And when we did our signal walk and mapped that data afterwards, look at all the green. So now we have a building that is fully compliant with the NFPA 1221 standard. We are obviously negative 85 actually, and better if you look at the colors on the screen there. So this would be the part of the final report that we would submit to the customer so that the AHJ could sign off, and we could show them that we did mitigate the signal problems within that building. So that doesn't mean it's over. So a BDA, like any other electronic device, requires routine upkeep. So an annual PM or preventive maintenance check of the equipment is dictated by a lot of AHJs if they are following the NFPA recommendation. And during that PM, we would not only look at the BDA radio itself, to make sure that it's performing up to the manufacturer's specifications. But we would also then do another heat map every year to measure that signal level so that we can show that, yeah, even though I told you that I touched all this equipment and I know that it's working, then I can show you through all this, all the measurement throughout this facility and producing this heat map that we have indeed maintained this BDA so that you are good for another year. You can rest easy knowing that a police officer, a firefighter, or an EMS professional can come into your facility and always be able to contact their dispatcher. The big red box here that you see where my cursor is, this is the BDA itself. It is that is an NFPA compliant enclosure that it's in. We can also see down to the left here where my cursor is, that is the battery backup box for the BDA. So if there is a catastrophic electrical failure for the facility, that it will keep going. And then we can also see that part of a BDA installation is also these annunciators here. These all connect into the building fire alarm system, so that if anything of importance of the BDA would fail, it is going to alert them. It's not going to make all the lights and sirens and abandoned ship kind of sirens go off in the building, but it will alert the building operator to let them know that there's a problem with the BDA. So that's just a quick look at what a BDA is. Whether you have a BDA already and you've never had an annual PM done, even if your AHJ doesn't require it, it's a good practice to be in, to make sure that when it's needed, and we know that it's going to be an emergency when it's needed, and we know that one thing that's unschedulable is an emergency, have that annual PM done. Have us come out and take a look at the BDA electronics. Have us come out and do another heat map for you so that we can show you and your AHJ, your fire inspector, your building inspector, that indeed you are doing everything that you can to make sure that their personnel are able to contact their dispatch, and they're able to contact for backup anytime that they come to your facility. So I hope you learned a little bit about heat mapping today and the importance of having your building evaluated to see whether you need a BDA. To have that annual inspection if you have a BDA already, and the importance of making sure that we produce documents like this to provide to your fire inspector, to your building inspector, to make sure that you're showing them that you're doing what you need to so that they can be in communication. Don't forget to visit us at our website at p&rcommunications.com. Down below, don't forget to leave a comment, like and subscribe our video, share it to your friends, and hopefully we'll see you next time here on P&R Communications Tech Tips.